LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 30 of the weekend's best clips for which should be a great show for you today. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. This week from 4 of the 5 big corporate outlets. No NBC Meet the Press this week, which was preempted by sports, so just ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News from the so-called corporate media here in the United States. No Bill Maher, HBO's Real Time's off for a couple weeks, and no Saturday Night Live till next fall, but I still found a little political comedy to start the show in a moment. After the comedic topic, the rest of the topics include race and police and the latest flare-up of tensions in Cleveland over the acquittal of this Officer Michael Brelo for shooting a couple unarmed African Americans after a car chase. Their mistaken car backfire as gunshots, or we'll get into that later. Also, the Hillary Clinton campaign, what's going on this week, and a possible vice presidential running mate. A little bit about the Republican Party and what's going on there. I'll have a couple clips from Mike Huckabee, one from John Kasich, although not so much on his political aspirations. I'll have several clips on the Patriot Act expiration and how it didn't pass the Senate, and NSA spying bulk phone record collection may be dead by June 1st. The biggest topic of where I have the most clips will be ISIS in Syria and Iraq. ISIS not only took Ramadi last Monday, but now they've taken Palmyra in Syria, and then Raqqa, this last crossing between Syria and Iraq, and that's caused a lot of news and political positions taken by people in different parties. And then the last topic will be the death penalty, and this news out of Nebraska that they may get rid of the death penalty in Nebraska, with a lot of conservatives pitching in to get rid of the death penalty. But first, as a point of personal privilege, I guess, because I'm a longtime fan of David Letterman, I wanted to show a quick clip from Dave's show earlier this year, and then I'll defend Dave from some of his right-wing critics who didn't enjoy the way Dave made fun of some conservatives and especially made George Bush look stupid. And even last February, Dave was predicting the sins of one Bush brother from Iraq might be visited on the other Bush brother, as you can see in this clip.
We have a new segment. I think this is fantastic. It's called Here We Go Again. I hope you enjoy it.
The problem is perhaps best demonstrated by this administration's approach to Iraq. We've had 35 years of experience with Iran.
Iran that is capable of rejecting Iranian influence. Iraq.
That's right. Here we go again.
Now, that clip was from last February, but it might as well have been from last week with all of Jeb Bush's problems giving a straight answer on Iraq that I covered in last week's show. And maybe Dave was particularly hard on George W. Bush. After all, my highest viewed video ever is actually includes a David Letterman top 10 list of embarrassing George W. Bush moments. It's called, here's a thumbnail for it. David Letterman makes fun of Bush in front of Bush, and there's a link to it down in the video description, which may again explain the way I saw Dave denigrated by many on the right wing this week. Both from some of the nasty conservatives I follow on Twitter, like Steven Crowder, but also on Fox News, including from their media critic Howard Kurtz, who did an entire segment called Hyping David Letterman that he teased with this clip.
After the break, David Letterman getting a standing ovation from the media as he signs off. But what if his impact on the culture wasn't all that positive?
And that was pretty nasty, I thought. And if you actually watch the segment, I have a link to the full segment down in the video description. They talk about how he was hurtful to the culture because he but irony and snark was too much of a just too destructive to our culture, and David Letterman is one of the big people who's responsible for bringing snark and irony into the culture, is basically why he gave that teaser. And then you can also see him give his personal opinion that Dave wasn't so great over in the beginning of the segment, just the first 15 seconds of it over here.
The critics have just showered David Letterman with praise, way over the top in my view, during the run-up to his final CBS show.
So yeah, I guess Dave's praise is way over the top. I don't know. I mean, I've been watching Dave since I've watched almost every episode. The first year he started in February '82 when I was a junior in high school, and about a year after that, when I turned 18 and could start signing myself out of school and staying up later, that's when I started watching Dave, and I pretty much watched all of the episodes since then, and I was a big fan. I mean, sometimes some of his stuff was kind of cheesy, and sometimes it wasn't always entertaining. You know, you do 6,000 plus shows. Not everything's going to be gold, I guess, but I think that he really did make a contribution to the culture, and a positive contribution. And I'm also looking forward to Stephen Colbert, and I think that one of the things that Stephen Colbert is going to bring that Dave also brought to the show is what he talked about in this commencement address at Wake Forest University. And I'm going to show a short clip there where he talks about how you have to judge yourself on your own standards over in this clip.
Having your own standards allows you to perceive success where others may see failure. I'm reminded of one famous inventor who was ridiculed for his dream. But flash forward 15 years to today, and do we or do we not now all ride Segways to work? We do not, but they are featured prominently in the movie Paul Blart Mall Cop. And that's good too. Here's another example. Over the years, I have given my work a lot of thought. I have my own standard for success now. I have a pretty good idea of what jokes will get laughs and a pretty good idea of what jokes may be iffy, but I'm going to say them anyway because I kind of like how iffy they are. And those who have watched my show over the years know I have made that decision many times. But having my own standards is why I could keep going at times when no one laughed, or when I thought the person I was interviewing might throw a punch at me. It's also why the epitaph on my tombstone will probably read, "Well, I thought it was funny."
And I like that. You know, last week when I showed some of the Louis C.K. jokes, I talked about edgy humor and liking humor that pushes the envelope, and that's similar, I guess, to what Stephen Colbert was talking about there. And I look forward to seeing what he can do. And yeah, I mean, he's already been in a corporate culture and Comedy Central, but I think the 11:30 slot on CBS is going to be even more corporate. So I'll see. I'm interested to see how he keeps his edge and does it in that format and with that supervision. So that, I believe, September 8th is when Stephen Colbert has his first show, and I'll miss Dave. I have to say that. Anyway, so the next topic I want to get to is, seems like it comes up every week or every couple weeks. There's another spark up of racial tension over a police shooting. This is actually a police shooting that happened in 2012. The verdict came down in acquittal for this officer, Michael Brelo, and shooting these two African Americans after a car chase. And rather than describe it myself, I will show you. Here's a clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, guest hosted by Jonathan Karl, and giving it to their reporter on the scene, Alex Perez, as to what's been going on in Cleveland recently here.
First, let's get the latest from ABC's Alex Perez. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, John. Authorities here today bracing for possibly another day of protests. Now, demonstrators took to the streets immediately following the judge's decision Saturday to acquit Cleveland police officer Michael Brelo in the shooting deaths of Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams back in 2012. Both were unarmed. The couple led police on a nearly 25-minute car chase. Once cornered, several officers were firing when Brelo jumped on the hood and fired 15 shots into their windshield. The judge ruled Brelo's use of deadly force was reasonable. While there have been some arrests, protests here have been, for the most part, peaceful. The victims' family members outraged by Brelo's acquittal. The Justice Department has announced they will be reviewing the judge's decision. John?
So that was how the ABC reporter covered it. Now I'm going to show you CBS's Face the Nation had a reporter talking to Bob Schieffer, who I'm not familiar with, Jerika Duncan, who gave a similar report, a few different details on what happened here.
The case of Cleveland officer Michael Brelo, who was acquitted yesterday of voluntary manslaughter in the shooting deaths of Melissa Williams and Timothy Russell. That was 2.5 years ago. CBS News correspondent Jerika Duncan is in Cleveland. Good morning, Jerika.
Good morning, Bob. The judge ruled yesterday that the use of force by Officer Brelo was justified under the circumstances. Now, right after that verdict was read, Brelo was obviously overcome with emotion. He was clearly relieved. He hugged his attorney and cried. Now, outside the courthouse in downtown Cleveland, there was outrage from the victim's family and some here in the community. For the most part, though, Saturday's protests remained peaceful. However, police say 71 people were arrested, mainly at night. Now, this case goes back to November of 2012, as you mentioned. Russell led police on a 22-mile chase. Police mistook the car's backfire for gunshots and shot at the car 137 times. Yesterday, Judge John P. O'Donnell described the bullet wounds and explained why he could not conclude Brelo's shots alone caused the deaths of Williams and Russell. Brelo, according to prosecutors, kept shooting at the car when other officers stopped, and prosecutors argued that he jumped on the hood of the car and fired those final 15 shots. Now, officials here and community leaders again have been able to keep the streets here peaceful. This is again, though, a city that is waiting to see whether criminal charges will be pursued in the shooting death of 12-year-old Tamir Rice. Bob?
Jerika Duncan in Cleveland.
And I think that may be one reason that things have stayed peaceful. It's kind of strange, but because they're waiting on this other case, this case from 2012 didn't, even though it was an acquittal, it didn't rev up the violence that we've seen in other cities, although there are other possible explanations. That was a question that CNN guest host of State of the Union, Jim Acosta, asked the reporter they had on the scene. I believe her name was Erin McLaughlin, and here's how she explained why the protests have been peaceful after this acquittal in Cleveland here.
And Erin, what was different about last night? Why did things stay so calm, do you think, relatively speaking?
I think that we have to remember that this was a case that took place in 2012. Following this incident, the Justice Department launched a 2-year investigation into what happened and come up with a series of recommendations to deal with what they determined as an excessive pattern of force on the part of the Cleveland Police Department. And the community has had time to digest this tragedy. And yesterday we saw members of the community coming out on the streets and vocalizing their upset at this court decision. The family, we heard, urging peace and urging calm. Jim?
So that's the explanation from that reporter on the scene, who obviously has a lot more sources than I do. I haven't actually followed that case very closely. It seemed kind of weird that it was a judge that made the decision. I don't know why everyone waived the jury trial, and it sounded like the judge made the decision on a pretty technical basis as to the cause of death, not so much any of the other factors that you might think would be important. But having shown that reporter's reasoning as to why there wasn't that much of or very little violent response. I guess there are about 70 people arrested, but no real, and one person threw a cafe sign at a cafe patron, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of violence against people or destruction of property. And John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, took credit for that over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to Jonathan Karl. He said it's because he's done such a good job of listening to the people, and I don't know. Like I said, I think it may have more to do with the Tamir Rice thing, and Jonathan Karl actually asked him about Tamir Rice, and he kind of waffled on that, didn't give a direct answer, as you can see over here.
Now, Ohio Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich, there's a lot of tension we're seeing in Cleveland over this verdict. We heard from Congresswoman Marcia Fudge saying it is a stunning setback, adding, today we have been told yet again our lives have no value. So let me ask you, do you believe justice was served with this verdict?
Well, look, the verdict is the verdict, John. What I will say is that I think the people of Cleveland have handled this. I mean, they should be so proud of themselves, and we should look at Cleveland as a model. The mayor, former Senator Nina Turner, some of the ministers, Todd Davidson, these are people who have said it is proper to protest, but at the same time, no violence, because violence in a community only destroys the community. Months ago, John, I created a task force on police and community, and I think that's also helped to send a message, I hope, around the state that we need an integration of police and community, and there were two recommendations up front: a policy regarding the use of deadly force statewide in Ohio, and secondly, research into the recruiting and enrollment of police officers, minority police officers. So I'm very, very sensitive to this issue. When there are large numbers of people who do not think the system works for them and in some ways works against them, we have to respond to it. And so in Cleveland, across the state of Ohio, we've been very aggressive in terms of saying, we hear you, we understand it. There are going to be a series of additional recommendations that's going to respond to the fact that community understands police and police needs to understand community. There's going to be money for training, for data collection. We've been over this. Fortunately, we started this months ago. We're the only task force on police and community that I'm aware of in the country, and it's serving us well. But the credit goes to the leadership in Cleveland who have spoken with one voice saying protest, but no violence is acceptable in Cleveland, and the people of Cleveland should be proud of what's been happening here in the last 24 hours.
And of course, this is the second major case we had. You have the Tamir Rice case, the 12-year-old boy, again unarmed, shot. This is going to take some time, isn't it? I mean, what is it going to take to heal the community?
Well, the Tamir Rice case is something we, of course, are all watching, and we hope we'll get a resolution, a decision on that sooner rather than later. But what it's going to take is the ability to lift everyone, to make sure that people in these communities know that there's an opportunity for them, that there is hope, that people in authority are listening, that there will be solid responses. And so we're just not talking about our task force. We're talking about solid recommendations that we intend to carry out. And Senator Nina Turner, African-American Democrat, who I had as part of the leadership of this team, made up of pastors, made up of community activists, the FOP. They've come forward with unanimous recommendations to start to right this problem and be very responsive, not just in Cleveland, but of course all across the state of Ohio. That doesn't mean this is the total solution, John. It doesn't. But it means we're on top of it as best we can. And again, the people of Cleveland protest. They ought to protest. That's their right. But violence has been kept to an absolute minimum in that city, and God bless the people of Cleveland.
Well, like I said, John Kasich kind of took credit there for the lack of violence. I don't know if that's the reason or what the reason is, but I wanted to show you that, and you saw how he responded to the Tamir Rice question, kind of dodged it. He also sounded a lot like someone who's going to run for president, and I'm not going to show the clips of the rest of the interview where Jonathan Karl asked him about his presidential aspirations, but he sounded very much like he is going to run for president, and I'll cover the Republican race for president with a couple clips in just a minute. But before I leave this topic of race and cops and this whole conflict, I want to show a clip from the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro, who is from Texas, and as I'll show in a minute, is being touted as a likely vice presidential running mate for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. But here is Julian Castro talking to, let me make sure I get the show, it's CNN State of the Union, talking to Jim Acosta about the conservatives who claim that the Great Society has failed, that liberals control all these cities, and that's where all the problems are, that I covered around the time of the violence in Baltimore a couple weeks ago. Here's how Julian Castro responds to that claim over here.
And Aaron, what was different about... And how do you respond to this notion, and I'm sure you've heard it in recent weeks, in response to what happened in Baltimore, that the Great Society was a failure? And I know that this is a time when you and the rest of the administration would like to see more resources going into our urban areas.
There are people who say that, and I would say that they're dead wrong. In fact, what we see today in the United States is because of these efforts, for instance, we've seen a strong reduction in childhood poverty. The challenge is that even when we find, based on evidence, initiatives that work, for instance, our Housing Choice Voucher Program was just the subject of a massive longitudinal study by Raj Chetty and Larry Katz out of Harvard that showed that educational and employment outcomes improve when young people have the benefit of a housing choice voucher so that they can move with their family to a place of lower poverty and higher opportunity. Even when we find things that work, for instance, in this budget, the president is requesting about 100,000 more vouchers than we have now because we lost nearly 70,000 to sequestration. And we're not getting the resources from this Congress to make those investments. And so it's about resources, and it's about how we coordinate better with local leaders to make a good impact on the ground.
So that was Julian Castro, like I said, giving good Democratic talking points as to what liberal policies can help people in the inner cities, and refuting the claim that the Great Society programs have failed. And he didn't go into great detail. There are a lot of better defenses than that, but he did have good talking points, and he sounded like he might be a good running mate for Hillary Clinton. And the next clip I'm going to show is one of the... So this is the next topic, is the Hillary Clinton run for the presidency. There are only 2 clips on that this week, and then I'll have 2 on the Republican side from Mike Huckabee. But first, this is Julian Castro, again talking to Jim Acosta on CNN State of the Union. Jim Acosta specifically asked him about this big rumor that he's like the #1 and only choice to be Hillary Clinton's running mate. And you'll see, first he denies it and says he's focusing on getting housing for homeless veterans, which is what starts this clip here, because there's a part of the interview where he talked about that as well, since he's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. But after he says, no, I'm not interested in being vice president, I'm just interested in focusing on my job, helping homeless vets, he then answers a question about Hillary Clinton's email problems that makes it sound very much like he's trying out to be her vice presidential running mate. And you can see that over here.
That we expect that we will effectively end veteran homelessness.
And that would be quite an accomplishment that you could tout in a run in 2016 if you were to be put on Hillary Clinton's ticket. I know you've heard this question time and again. I can't let you go without talking about this. What do you make of this when you see the former San Antonio mayor and former secretary at your department, Henry Cisneros, say this? He says, what I'm hearing in Washington, including from people in Hillary Clinton's campaign, is that the first person on their list for vice president is Julian Castro. They don't have a second option. So I guess that's it. You've got the job. So congratulations.
I doubt that. If I had a dime for every amount of speculation that happens in D.C., I think all of us would be wealthy.
Your budget would be a lot bigger, is that it?
That's right. Who wouldn't be flattered by that? But I have found in life, like I bet a lot of the folks watching out there, that the best thing to do in life is to do a great job with what's in front of you. And I'm trying to do a great job at HUD and make sure that we benefit Americans out there this weekend of Memorial Day weekend, when we think about our veterans, the fact that all of us together on both sides of the aisle are committed to making a difference and getting those veterans a place to live, and that it's happening. And we are going to have that glorious day in the not too distant future when we can say that we have effectively ended veteran homelessness. That's what I'm focused on these days.
Let me ask you one more question about the 2016 campaign. These emails that have been released by the State Department with respect to Hillary Clinton and her time there, the private emails that she was using to conduct business at the department. Do you believe that she has answered that question appropriately and fully?
Oh, I absolutely
You're
do.
satisfied?
Oh, I do. I mean, let's take a look at this issue of Benghazi. This thing has been studied to death by Republicans and Democrats, several committees, including in Congress, that have all said, yes, of course, what happened was tragic, but Secretary Clinton was not in any way at fault. And what you have here with his emails is basically a witch hunt. And you know, Congressman Gowdy, who is leading this, is very intentionally trying to manipulate this witch hunt to play politics. That's unfortunate, and it's one of the reasons that Congress has a 19% approval rating. I think that we need to focus on more substantive things. As one who hasn't spent my lifetime in D.C., I know that out there in America, they care about, are you reducing veteran homelessness? Are you providing the impetus for young people to be able to achieve their dreams? Are we making sure that America in this 21st century remains the undisputed land of opportunity, not whether somebody had emails or didn't have them?
Do you use a private email account?
I have my government email account. Of course, I have my private email, but I have my government email. But that's beside the point. I think she hasn't...
You do government business on the government email account? And
that's right.
Private business on the private.
And she's already explained that. Yeah. People want us to focus as policymakers on things that matter to their lives. They want us to make a difference in creating more opportunity out there. And that's just a witch hunt that is a sideshow. I think the work that we're doing to end veteran homelessness is a good example of something that matters.
All right.
So witch hunt, sideshow, or do you think that Julian Castro sounds like someone trying out to be vice presidential running mate to Hillary Clinton? He seems to have his defense of Hillary Clinton's email scandal down, and the email scandal, or I don't know, maybe some people think it's a scandal, or it's at least a weakness in her campaign, I guess, was covered in the same way you saw in that last clip on most of the shows where they asked people questions about it. I'll show over on Fox News Sunday the softball question to Mike Huckabee on that topic in a minute. But the only show that actually did a report where they had one of their campaign reporters, Cecilia Vega, this is ABC reporter Cecilia Vega on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, doing an extended report on Hillary's email problem. And even though George Stephanopoulos was off this week, Jonathan Karl was the guest host. I don't know, I think this may be something we're going to be seeing for a while, where George Stephanopoulos' show and George Stephanopoulos are going to be especially harsh on the Clintons and Hillary Clinton's campaign to try to make up for his donations to the Clinton Foundation. I guess we'll have to see how that develops over time, but here's how ABC covered, and their reporter Cecilia Vega reported on the email scandals in this clip.
Now the 2016 campaign trail and the political story that keeps growing. There you see Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire this week as the State Department released hundreds of emails about Benghazi and more from her private account. Clinton told voters in New Hampshire she's happy the emails are out, but as ABC's Cecilia Vega reports, it set off another political firestorm.
From Iowa to New Hampshire,
amazing. I mean, this is so complex.
Hillary Clinton on the trail this week, finally taking questions, so many about those emails. The State Department releasing the first 300 written on then Secretary Clinton's personal account stored on her home server. What they show, while Clinton never sent classified information, one email was considered so sensitive, the FBI has now classified it.
That doesn't change the fact that all of the information in the emails was handled appropriately.
Clinton also received numerous back-channel briefings from longtime confidant Sidney Blumenthal. In an exchange less than 3 weeks before the deadly attack in Benghazi, Blumenthal writes about deteriorating security. Clinton forwards the email to senior staff saying, "Very interesting." Staff response, "Yes, some warning signs." Another exchange about former UN Ambassador Susan Rice, who told the world an internet video mocking Islam sparked the spontaneous attack, while it was later revealed to be a planned terrorist attack. Staffers reassuring Clinton, "You never said spontaneous or characterized the motives. In fact, you were careful in your first statement." The release had Clinton on the defensive.
Do you have a perception problem? Many Americans don't believe that you've told the truth on Benghazi. I'm going to let the Americans decide that. Thank you all very much.
Republicans have yet to point to a smoking gun, but they are still blasting Clinton for hand-selecting those emails, 55,000 pages in all, the rest to be released in batches in the coming months.
So now we're to trust her that the ones she turned over are all of the emails. I personally won't be satisfied till we look at the server.
And Clinton announced her first big campaign rally will take place in June. Many of these emails will come out just as this race is heating up, and she is clearly trying to move on from this. Clinton telling voters this week that she is not running for her husband's third term or, John, for President Obama's third term.
Thank you, Cecilia.
So yeah, there you can see ABC doing over 2 minutes of reporting on Hillary's email scandal or email problem or whatever you want to call it. That seems to be a continuing issue that we're going to keep hearing about for over a year, I guess, assuming she becomes the nominee, which is what everyone seems to say is most likely. And on the other side, on the Republican side, it's hard to tell who's going to be the nominee, but one of the people who is trying really hard is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. He was over on Fox News Sunday, and I showed how ABC was being especially critical of Hillary Clinton. You'll see over on Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace gives a really laudatory introduction to Mike Huckabee, talking about what a great guy he is, and then gives him a softball question on the Hillary email scandal, and you get the response you might expect, and then all sorts of red meat about Benghazi, which is sort of the opposite of what you heard from Julian Castro a couple clips ago. Here's Mike Huckabee's take after getting buttered up by Chris Wallace this morning here.
Today weekend, there's also politics and national security. We begin with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who ran second for the GOP presidential nomination in 2008, became a star on Fox News Channel, but then left television to run again. Governor Huckabee joins us now, and welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be back.
I want to start with a couple of breaking stories. First of all, the release on Friday by the State Department of 296 of Hillary Clinton's emails concerning Benghazi. Here's the reaction that you gave. We expect these charades and masquerades in USSR, that's the old Soviet Union, not the U.S. Governor, explain what you mean by that.
Well, the secrecy with which this government has operated, and specifically Hillary Clinton using a private email server outside the bounds of normal State Department protocol, is very troubling, especially because we have yet to get an answer to what happened in Benghazi. And while I know that that sounds like something, an old broken record, we need to know, why did 4 different times an ambassador call for help and no help came? The one thing American soldiers and American diplomats need to know, wherever they're stationed across the world, is when they're under fire and being shot at, we will move heaven and earth to try to get to them, to rescue them, and to protect them. And we didn't do that on the night of Benghazi. Hillary's phone rang at 3 in the morning, and she let it go to voicemail. We need to know why.
So Hillary's phone rang at 3 a.m. and she let it go to voicemail. Red meat for the Republican primaries, and he's basically blaming the 4 American deaths on Hillary Clinton, even though none of the investigations have really found any of that to be true. I obviously side more with what you heard from Julian Castro on that, but that wasn't even the most disturbing thing that Mike Huckabee said. That was kind of expected. What I found kind of disturbing was his comments about the Supreme Court. This is similar to some of the things he said in his announcement speech. Chris Wallace actually plays a clip of his announcement speech where he talks about not necessarily obeying the supremacy of the Supreme Court. He has like some sound bites in here about how it's the Supreme Court, not the supreme being. But he doesn't seem to understand that there is judge-made law, that case law is law, and that courts do make law. That's the main flaw. His lack of understanding of law is the main flaw in the argument that you can see him make in response to Chris Wallace here.
Indicate that as president, you wouldn't necessarily obey court rulings, even the Supreme Court. Here you are.
Many of our politicians have surrendered to the false god of judicial supremacy, which would allow black-robed and unelected judges the power to make law as well as enforce it.
But, Governor, we have operated under the principle of judicial review since the Marbury versus Madison case in 1803.
Judicial review is exactly what we've operated under. We have not operated under judicial supremacy. Presidents Lincoln, Jefferson, Jackson, presidents have understood that the Supreme Court cannot make a law. They cannot make it. The legislature has to make it. The executive branch has to sign it and enforce it. And the notion that the Supreme Court comes up with a ruling and that automatically subjects the two other branches to following it defies everything there is about the three equal branches of government. Chris, the Supreme Court is not the supreme branch, and for God's sake, it isn't the supreme being.
But sir,
it is the Supreme Court.
But sir, George Will, the conservative columnist, has pointed out that back in 1957, another governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, decided to disregard and refused to obey the Supreme Court's ruling to desegregate schools. President Eisenhower had to call in the 101st Airborne. Are you saying that President Huckabee might decide he wasn't going to obey the ruling on desegregation, or like President Nixon to turn over the tapes, that, you know, it's up in the air as to whether you're going to obey the Supreme Court?
Well, Chris, as you know, George Will is no fan of mine. He's not very fond of me. He recently called me appalling. So I'm not surprised that he would make such a false comparison. But the point is, in that case, the Supreme Court had ruled, the legislature and the executive branch had agreed with the Supreme Court, and precisely what happened is what should happen. The president ordered the airborne to come in and enforce the law that did exist. But it wasn't that the president defied the law. The president was carrying out the law and using all the forces at his resource to do it.
But okay, let's say the president decided, I don't like the Supreme Court's ruling on that. Let's say Nixon had said, for instance, in Watergate, I don't want to turn over the tapes and the court can't make me.
Well, the president still has to follow whatever the law is. Does Congress have a law that tells him what he's going to do? In that case, the Congress was ready to impeach Nixon, and he ultimately resigned. I want to get back to the main point here. It's a matter of balance of power. If the Supreme Court could just make a ruling and everybody has to bow down and fall on their faces and worship that law that isn't a law because it hasn't been yet passed, then what if the Supreme Court ruled that they were going to make the decision as to who was going to be the next president and save the taxpayers and the voters from all the expense and trouble of voting, and they'll just pick a president? Well, we would say, well, they can't do that. Why can't they do it? They can't do it because it's not in the law. We are sworn to uphold the Constitution and the law, and it has to be consistent and agreed upon with three branches of government. One can't overrule the other two. That's all I'm saying. We learned that in 9th grade civics, but I'm convinced a lot of Ivy League law schools must have forgotten that simple basic civics lesson along the way.
Well, that last argument or near the end argument that he made about how the Supreme Court can't, you know, how we would all realize it was wrong if the Supreme Court just picked a president. Did he forget about the Bush v. Gore case, where they basically said, we're not going to let Florida go to all the expense of counting the votes. We're just going to decide George W. Bush is the president. I mean, is he totally clueless that the Supreme Court did that? And he does seem to be totally clueless about the fact that not even just in the United States, going back through the whole common law system in Great Britain, they have judge-made law where there are precedents that are set by judges that interpret the law, and those precedents have the force of law to, like, other courts, and that's judge-made law. And if the power of judicial review is the power of courts to overturn laws, and that's another way of basically a legislative power of the judiciary. So Mike Huckabee's understanding of the Constitution there I don't think is very good. So the next topic is the Patriot Act expiration and NSA spying, and I have, I think, 5 clips on that, and the first one's going to be from Mike Huckabee, where I think he did a better job of understanding the Constitution, or at least getting the right talking points on the Constitution, when Chris Wallace asked him about whether he would be in favor or against this NSA spying that's up for renewal in front of the Congress in looks like it may actually expire on June 1st, the Patriot Act, including Section 215 that supposedly authorized bulk phone record collection, even though it was found illegal by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But I'll get to that after you watch the clip here.
Let me ask you about another breaking question. Congress is more deadlocked than ever about what to do about the NSA's bulk data collection of phone records with the program set to expire on June 1st. Here's what you had to say about that this week.
Does the Constitution allow the government to read the mail and to listen to the phone calls, even to collect them without a warrant or probable cause? And I think the obvious answer is no, it does not.
A couple of points here, Governor. First of all, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is the section that is going to expire on June 1st, has nothing to do with listening in on phone calls. It's just recording the fact that my phone number called your phone number. So aren't you one wrong there when you talk about listening in? And secondly, what would you do? What do you think we need to do about this bulk data collection?
Well, I think the Constitution already provides what we should do. If you have probable cause to suspect that Chris Wallace is acting in some nefarious manner, you go to a judge, you get a warrant, and then you listen in on his calls, because now you've got the other branch of government that's constitutionally required to be a part of that process. You don't just give the executive branch unlimited resources, unlimited power. Our founders were very concerned about too much power being invested in any one, in any branch. The balance of power is fundamental to our system. And I don't want to be made unsafe, but Chris, 225 different terrorist plots over the past years since 9/11, and so far not one of them has been tied directly to the NSA's collection of metadata. So if this is so effective, how come it hasn't resulted in the foiled terrorist plots? Those have been foiled by old-fashioned good police work, old-fashioned human intelligence. It seems like we're spending billions of dollars on the whiz-bang technology and not enough money on human resources, which really is proven to be the most effective way of stopping terrorism.
So there's not a lot to disagree with in what Mike Huckabee said there, even though his understanding of the role of the judicial branch is very flawed, as I showed in that previous clip. In that clip, he's making all the right arguments. Maybe he's been influenced by Rand Paul, and I'm going to show some clips of Rand Paul from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Jonathan Karl did a report on what's going on in the Congress and how Rand Paul did this filibuster, and how it showed first that he was kind of grandstanding and even merchandising out of it, and then also the split in the Republican candidates. And I'll discuss all that after you see that clip here.
Meanwhile, we just saw that scramble in the Republican-led Senate over the government's domestic surveillance program. A group of senators early Saturday trying to take down the Patriot Act, blocking a vote to extend it. One of the key players, presidential candidate Rand Paul. His actions may have big implications for the war on terror and for his own prospects in 2016.
Made phone calls and all
There's Senator Rand Paul, once again having a filibuster moment, leading a 10-hour talkathon against renewal of key provisions of the Patriot Act.
And I will not let the Patriot Act, the most unpatriotic of acts, go unchallenged. So the American people say, enough's enough, we want our privacy protected. The bulk collection must end, and I think we have the votes to do it now.
By attempting to dismantle a key part of George W. Bush's war on terror, he's once again showing he's not your average Republican. He's done it on drones.
When I asked the president, can you kill an American on American soil, it should have been an easy answer.
He's done it on criminal justice reform.
I see an America where criminal justice is applied equally.
While Paul was making his Senate floor stand, his campaign was hawking merchandise, a filibuster starter pack with this t-shirt and a bumper sticker for $30. Paul's stance puts him on a collision course with his 2016 Republican rivals. From Chris Christie,
the first job of a president of the United States is to protect the homeland, and that's what we need to do,
to Jeb Bush.
There is ample evidence that the Patriot Act has been a tool to keep us safe. There is no evidence of anyone's civil liberties being violated because of it.
The former Florida governor, meanwhile, was out on the trail, trying to move on from his stumble over the Iraq War, finding a new way to put distance between himself and his brother.
I think that in Washington during my brother's time, Republicans spent too much money. But he could have brought budget discipline to Washington, D.C.
Now, that report from Jonathan Karl emphasized the split in the Republican Party. There's also a split in the Democratic Party, although I think more Democrats oppose Patriot Act renewal than are in favor of it. I'm not sure. I don't have exact numbers on that, but I'm going to show you an example of a Democrat who is in favor of the NSA spying power. This is Democratic Representative Adam Schiff talking to Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Congress failed to get a deal to extend the National Security Agency surveillance program, which allows for the bulk collection of telephone numbers in this country. Do you see any kind of a compromise on the horizon on this, or is this program just going to shut down on July the 1st, or June 1st, I guess it is? And if it does, what will be the impact of that?
Well, ironically, we had a great compromise. We passed it in the House with over 330 votes, very bipartisan, and there's a majority of support in the Senate itself for that very same compromise. So what happened this week in the Senate, I think, was a catastrophe in terms of rejecting a very well thought out, broadly supported compromise that the intelligence community itself embraces. It has the merit of reforming those authorities to end bulk collection, but maintaining the surveillance tools that are necessary to protect the country. What happens right now, it looks like this program is going to expire. Now, I think the Senate, when it comes back in, I hope we'll see wisdom and pass what we passed in the House. That's the only way to prevent a real interruption in this program. And Bob, bear in mind that it's not just the authority for bulk collection that's going to expire, it's some other very important tools as well that deal with roving wiretaps, that deal with lone wolf threats, as well as the more rudimentary use of Section 215 to get records like hotel records or financial records.
All right.
So that's a Democrat, although he is pushing the compromise, the USA Freedom Act, which does take the records out of the hands of the government, put it in the hands of the telecoms, and put some more safeguards, some more judicial intervention. So, but that was actually rejected in the Senate by Mitch McConnell, and that they're coming back next Sunday. I don't know if it's during the show or before the show, but they only have like a few hours to get the Patriot Act renewed. And one thing that nobody mentioned was that the Second Circuit Court of Appeals found that the bulk phone record collection program wasn't even authorized by Section 215 of the Patriot Act. I did not see that mentioned in the coverage on any of the shows this morning, which is pretty appalling if you think about it. But anyway, having shown a Democrat in favor of NSA spying, I want to show a Republican. This is Mac is it Thornberry? Let me make sure I get his name right. Mac Thornberry talking to Jonathan Karl about the expiration of the Patriot Act, and he talks about how there's also this lone wolf section that's going to expire, and he even talks about the threat from ISIS, and I'll get to that more in a minute after you see that clip over here.
We're almost out of time. Very quickly, the Patriot Act's surveillance program expires next Sunday at midnight.
Yeah.
How worried are you about that?
I'm worried about it. We passed what I think is an imperfect bill out of the House, but it's better than letting it expire. Among the other provisions that expired are the lone wolf provisions, which are exactly the sort of threat we're going to see more of here at home. So we need to have that crucial intelligence capability continue.
All right, Chairman Thornberry, thank you very much.
So remember what Mike Huckabee said, which happens to be true, that there's no evidence that any plot has actually been foiled by this bulk phone record collection program. And I also wanted to show on Fox News Sunday, they not only had a guest on, I'm not going to show clips of James Bolton, the former ambassador James Bolton, who talked about how crucial this was and tried to refute what Mike Huckabee said by saying that bulk phone record collection had been a factor in all of these cases, whatever a factor means, because it hasn't solved any cases. and but Fox News Sunday definitely was taking the Bolton point of view, or John Bolton. Did I say James Bolton? John Bolton, the former ambassador to the United Nations in a recess appointment, never actually confirmed, but he was UN ambassador under George W. Bush. That I'm not going to show you, but I am going to show you how Chris Wallace adopted his position and the way he connected NSA spying to what's going on in ISIS, right in this his teaser for an upcoming clip here.
Up next, with ISIS growing as a threat, is this any time to shut down the government's surveillance program? We'll talk with Ambassador John Bolton, a leading supporter of bulk data collection, when we come right back.
So yeah, Fox News Sunday, you don't have to get opinions like that from the guests. You can get it from the host that NSA spying is going to cause us danger from ISIS, even though they had Mike Huckabee, their former Fox News contributor and a guest on earlier, saying, no, it didn't solve it's never solved any terrorist threat. It's never been used to solve a terrorist threat successfully, even though it's been going on for all these years. Anyway, I want to move on to the topic of ISIS and Syria and Iraq. Like I said, ISIS has had a lot of successes recently, taking over Ramadi, the capital of the Anbar province. This week, that was on Monday, and then later in the week, Palmyra, this city in Syria, and also the border crossing between Syria and Iraq. They've pretty much taken all of that over. I'm going to show you a few stories on that. First, the one from CNN's State of the Union. This is Jim Acosta, then giving it over to their reporter, Arwa Damon, talking about whether we're winning or losing. That seemed to be the big question of the day that I'll get to after you watch that report here.
Had one of its biggest weeks in nearly a year. ISIS seized control of the ancient Syrian town of Palmyra, as well as the city of Ramadi, the capital of Iraq's Anbar province. And let's go to CNN senior international correspondent Arwa Damon in Baghdad. Is ISIS being pushed back? Is ISIS losing ground? That is something. Those are two assertions that the White House was making last week to sort of cool down all of the second guessing that's been taking place here in Washington. What can you tell us from the ground there?
Well, look, first of all, one has to continuously keep in mind that the battle lines here are constantly shifting, and small chunks of territory do regularly go back and forth. But following the fall of Ramadi about a week ago, ISIS did quite quickly push into various other smaller towns located to the east of Ramadi. Now, the Iraqi government has managed to recapture some of them, but not only on its own. You had a unit that was comprised of the Iraqi army plus, and this was arguably the deciding factor in all of this, the Popular Mobilization Units, and that is this Iranian-backed Shia paramilitary force. And it was largely due to them that they were able to accomplish these very small victories in the grander scheme of things. They are using the Sunni tribes, we're being told, using them to hold ground, but these Sunni tribes are very underarmed when it comes to the potential threat that they might be facing by ISIS. But look, the government at this stage has no choice but to use these unconventional fighting forces, as has been painfully clear at this point. The Iraqi government does not have its own units directly under its own command that are capable of taking on an entity like ISIS.
So those issues that Arwa Damon raised there about the Sunni tribes not being well armed and the use of the Shia militias instead of regular Iraqi forces, that'll come up in some clips I'll show in a minute. But I want to show a few more, or a couple more reports on the issue. Next is from that last. Did I get her name right, or did I get her name wrong? There, it's Arwa. The first ISIS clip there was Arwa Damon. Yeah, that was her report. Then the next one is Clarissa Ward. Arwa Damon was actually in Baghdad. Clarissa Ward, I think, is reporting from Beirut, if I'm remembering correctly, over in this clip.
Campaign against ISIS. The Islamic terrorists have been on the move and have now seized the Iraqi city of Ramadi, just outside Baghdad, and they captured the historic city of Palmyra and other key areas in Syria. CBS News foreign correspondent Clarissa Ward is just back from Beirut. She joins us now from London. Clarissa.
Good morning, Bob. Well, ISIS has taken control of another border crossing between Iraq and Syria. Fighters captured the Al-Walid crossing this morning, giving them control of the two main roads between Syria and Anbar province in Iraq, where the group has been pushing forward after taking the city of Ramadi last weekend. Iraqi forces today launched a counteroffensive in Anbar to try to regain some of their losses. Among those forces are thousands of members of Shiite militias. Of course, the concern there is that the presence of those Shiite militias in Sunni-dominated Anbar will only raise the specter of an all-out sectarian bloodbath. But certainly, the Iraqi government doesn't appear to have a lot of options. Videos from Ramadi last Sunday showed Iraqi security forces fleeing the battlefield, abandoning their bases, leaving behind their American-supplied weapons and equipment. This in spite of intensified U.S. airstrikes against ISIS in the run-up to the fall of Ramadi. And just days later, ISIS took the Syrian city of Palmyra. This is a strategic victory because it's surrounded by gas fields, but it also, Bob, puts the future of some of Syria's most precious cultural heritage in jeopardy. That ancient city's 2,000-year-old ruins are now under the control of ISIS fighters who have previously destroyed cultural relics that they deemed to be un-Islamic. So two significant victories in two countries in the course of a week, really calling into question, Bob, the effectiveness of the U.S.'s strategy for dealing with ISIS.
So that's not a very comforting report as to what ISIS is up to and the destruction of cultural relics and the also the what Clarissa Ward reported there about the regular Iraqi forces basically fleeing the battle in Ramadi. That's going to be confirmed by the Secretary of Defense in a clip I'm going to show in a little bit. But first, I want to show another report. This one has the most sensational charge about the ISIS threat. Jonathan Karl talking to Alex Marquardt, and he teases the threat, and you'll see what it is over in this clip.
Now to the growing ISIS threat. Brand new details this morning on the jihadist group's alarming moves, taking key territory, and now making a startling claim about buying nuclear weapons. ABC's Alex Marquardt has the latest.
This morning, ISIS on a roll, scoring major land grabs in the past week. The group now estimated to control half of Syria and taking the key Iraqi city of Ramadi. There, the Iraqi army once again appeared to crumble. These soldiers, pinned down by ISIS, evacuated by rescue helicopters.
I don't believe anybody felt that Ramadi would fall, and I think it's of great concern to everyone.
ISIS used 30 car bombs to take Ramadi, including 10 the size of the Oklahoma City blast. Just days later, across the border in Syria, ISIS routed government troops in the ancient city of Palmyra, home to majestic ruins more than 2,000 years old. The fear, ISIS could destroy treasures there and loot other artifacts to fund their campaign. Despite the ISIS gains, in an interview with The Atlantic this week, the president insisted we're not losing, instead calling it a tactical setback.
That's what degrading ISIS's capabilities looks like?
This is what
10 Oklahoma City bombings?
This is what a military conflict looks like, and this is what a very tenacious adversary looks like.
Republican critics pounced.
Where is our decency? Where is our concern about these thousands of people that are being slaughtered and displaced?
And in a new claim online, the jihadist group now says it has so much money, it may soon be able to buy a nuclear weapon. A horrifying prospect that last year the president said would trigger the need for U.S. ground troops.
If we discovered that ISIL had gotten possession of a nuclear weapon, yes, you can anticipate that not only would Chairman Dempsey recommend me sending U.S. ground troops to get that weapon out of their hands, but I would order it.
Syrian and Iraqi forces on their heels, the U.S. grappling with its strategy as the ISIS momentum grows. For this week, Alex Marquardt, ABC News.
So that's kind of scary to think that ISIS would get a nuclear weapon, and if you are scared by that, you have to know there's really no evidence that they're actually going to do that, according to a question or an answer that Jonathan Karl got when he had that Republican on, the Republican Congressman Mac Thornberry, and asked him about the report, and he basically admitted, no, there's no real evidence it's going to happen, but we still have to go and get them because they're a threat. Over in this clip.
Thornberry, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Chairman Thornberry, we heard an alarming claim there. It's just this is ISIS online saying that by next year they believe that they will have the means to purchase a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. Any evidence that that could happen?
Well, no evidence that it has happened. Would they do it if they had the opportunity? Of course. Would they use it if they had it? I don't think there's any doubt. So what do we do about it? Number one, we don't wait till they get it before we take action that seriously degrades and destroys ISIS. Secondly, we keep pushing at their finances to lower the amount of money they have. But the other thing we've got to do is improve our intelligence capability. We, I think, know less today than we knew 5 or 6 years ago about what terrorists around the world are doing for a variety of reasons. But the key way to know what they're doing to prevent them from getting a nuclear, chemical, biological weapon is to augment our intelligence capability, and then you've got to act. You can't draw red lines that you don't follow up on.
Okay, well, I want to ask you one key aspect of that being the Patriot Act, but before we get to that,
well, I already showed where he asked him about the Patriot Act, but you can see Jonathan Karl on ABC also is willing to connect up the Patriot Act NSA spying with the threat from ISIS after hyping that nuclear threat that you saw the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee say there's no evidence for it, really. But I want to show another Republican, no criticism of the Obama administration would be complete without bringing on the grouchy old man of the Senate, Senator John McCain, although I guess I should be nice to him since it's Memorial Day and he's a veteran and all. But here you can see him say that the Obama administration has no strategy and we need more boots on the ground and more ground forces. And I think by the end, it always comes back to Iran by the end. So here's that clip.
We need to have a strategy. There is no strategy. And anybody that says that there is, I'd like to hear what it is, because it certainly isn't apparent now. And right now, we are seeing these horrible, the reports are now in Palmyra, they're executing people and leaving their bodies in the streets. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is saying that the biggest enemy we have is climate change.
Well, you know, Senator, I mean, and the President called these latest setbacks, he called them technical setbacks or something to that effect. But there's no appetite in this country, I think it's fair to say, for sending a lot more American troops into Iraq. But is that in the end going to be necessary? And I guess the reason I would ask you that, is this posing a threat to our national security?
Well, first of all, there's a larger number of Americans that believe we ought to have more American troops on the ground. Not the massive 82nd Airborne, but certainly in the realm of a number of thousands, so we can do the missions that I just described to you. The beheadings had a profound effect on American public opinion, as it should have. And your second question was...
well, what can we do?
Oh, I mean, we can, as I say, forward air controllers, special forces, training, equipping. Right now, it's Shia militia, the same ones that we fought against during the surge, that are now doing the fighting. The overall winner in this whole conflict right now is not ISIS, it's Iran. It's Iran who is controlling 4 countries now and on the move.
Well, so that, you know, like I said, comes back to Iran, but also the Shia militias, which will be an issue that I'll talk about in just a minute. And after I show this clip of Adam Schiff where, you know, I criticized him for being too gung-ho on NSA spying, at least he points out that the solution to the problem in Iraq isn't primarily a military solution, it's a political solution. It has to do with the Shias and the Sunnis and getting, if there's going to be a unified Iraq, getting the Shia government to bring in these Sunni tribesmen from the Anbar province and share power with them and even give them weapons, as I'll get to with some clips from CNN State of the Union in a minute. But first, this is Adam Schiff, also on Face the Nation, talking about the political solution necessary. I think it might even be in response to John McCain here.
Well, Congressman, you heard John McCain. Give me your analysis for what's going on right now in Iraq and in Syria.
Well, the loss of Ramadi, I think, was a very serious setback, and it's one that is deeply felt, I think, by Americans. We lost a lot of our troops in Ramadi, and this Memorial Day weekend, we think about those losses. They weigh heavily on us. But in terms of the Iraq war itself, I think there's an important lesson here, and that is we won Ramadi, but it didn't stay won because the political problems that preceded the first Iraq war haven't been solved, and that is the Sunnis have not been brought into the government adequately. Sunni forces haven't been adequately trained and integrated into the military. And until those changes are made, until Iraq makes the political decision to fully incorporate the Sunnis, we can add more forces, we can win these battles, but they're not going to stay won. I think that's the real lesson of the last Iraq war and what's going on now.
Well, you know, years after we came through the Vietnam experience, I remember thinking, you know, we kept asking during that period, are we winning? And when you have to ask the question, generally you're not winning because victory is always obvious. Do you think we're winning now?
I would say that we're winning. I don't think we're losing either, but I think we're seeing an ebb and flow and largely a stalemated situation in the war against ISIS. I get concerned when I hear the administration use the metric of how many sorties, how many bombing runs we're doing. I think the more important metrics are how are we doing in stopping foreign fighters entering the country? How are we doing in drying up ISIS's resources? How are we doing in working with our Gulf allies on fighting the ideological fight within Islam that we're not positioned to fight ourselves? And how are we doing in terms of our military support? And on that latter point, that's where I think Ramadi really comes into play. I think we still have a lot of work to keep the pressure on the Iraqi government to fully incorporate the Sunnis, to peel those Sunni tribes away from ISIS, because until that happens, we're not going to be successful in the military struggle.
Now, that's one interesting analysis of how to bring in the Sunni tribes to keep Iraq unified, but some people seem to think that it's going to split up, and I'm going to show you an argument in a couple clips from another Democrat, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who's a former Iraq vet and also is very hawkish on troops against ISIS. I think I've shown clips in the past on this, and here she's talking about not really getting the Iraqi government to bring in the Sunni tribes, but sort of bypassing them and giving arms to the Sunni tribes ourselves, which seems more a way to divide up Iraq than to put it together. And I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
Congressman, for being here on State of the Union this morning. Let's get right to it. President Obama said earlier this week that the U.S.-led coalition is not losing this battle against ISIS. Congressman, I'll go to you first. Is he right about that?
You know, clearly ISIS has gained momentum, in particular over the last week, as we've seen the ground that they've gained both in Iraq and Syria. And I'd like to just break it down to what I see as you know, the basic problem here, especially in Iraq, where we're seeing the Sunnis continue to be persecuted by this central government in Baghdad. Their distrust for the central government, this Iranian-influenced Shia militia, has really created a situation where, just as a matter of survival, they have no place else to turn to protect their families and their communities other than to ISIS. You have the solution. You've got the Kurds, the Kurdish Peshmerga, and you have Sunni tribesmen who are literally begging. I met with a Sunni tribal leader last week in Washington. They are begging for arms, heavy weapons, ammunition to be able to fight against ISIS, to protect their families and their tribal lands and their territories. But still, to this point, both the U.S. and the central Iraqi government is failing to provide that, and therefore ISIS continues to be able to grow.
Now, I agree that the Iraqi central government should be supplying arms to the Sunni tribesmen rather than using these Shia militias that are controlled by Iran. That would be better for the United States, but it probably wouldn't be better for the central Iraqi government in terms of pleasing their Shia base. And I don't know if there is going to be reconciliation between the Shia and the Sunni, but this idea of giving the arms directly to the Sunnis if the central government doesn't, that could be a real problem, and you can hear why not intentionally. This is another argument from Representative Tulsi Gabbard where she is asked what the strategy should be, and she reiterates this idea of arming the Sunnis, and you'll hear at the end she explains why that might be dangerous, even though she doesn't seem to realize it over in this clip.
That in place in terms of providing air support to the Iraqi security forces on the ground, or the Peshmerga in the Kurdish areas to the north, but it doesn't seem like that is an effective strategy at this point, that it is just not working. You can get into semantics as to whether we're winning or losing or failing, but that strategy just doesn't seem to work. So, I mean, what do you propose, do you think, at this point?
Yeah, Jim, I'd like to point out a couple of things. I think that there's definitely more that we can do in providing these decisive blows with airstrikes against these ISIS strongholds. But the Iraqi government actually does have a choice. They have a choice by arming directly the Sunni tribesmen. As your correspondent just pointed out, they are woefully under-equipped. They have the will to fight. They are on the ground begging, saying, please give us the heavy weapons, the arms, the ammunition that we need to be able to fight against ISIS. Instead, the Iraqi government is relying completely on this Iranian-backed Shia military. The U.S. government is now saying, well, we're going to expedite more arms, more ammunition, these anti-tank weapons to the Iraqi government when we see that these Iraqi security forces have cut and run and left their weapons for ISIS at a few opportunities, and these weapons are getting into the hands of the Shia militia. And I want to point out something that happened in the arms while we were going through the Armed Services Committee hearing process for the National Defense Authorization Act, where I co-sponsored an amendment that would authorize the U.S. government directly arming the Kurds and the Shias. We had a leader of this Shia militia, Muqtada al-Sadr, as we were going through this hearing live, quote, he said, if this bill is passed, we will have no choice but to unfreeze the military wing that deals with the Americans so it can start targeting American interests both in and outside of Iraq. So when you look at this, these are the people that the United States is aligning itself with, who are essentially saying, we're going to come out and attack you if you don't do what we want.
Well, I mean, those are people in Iraq saying that if you are Shias in Iraq saying if you arm the Sunnis, we're going to attack you. And I'm not sure who should get to do what they want there. Whether shouldn't it be the Iraqi central government which is highly influenced by Iran and by Muqtada al-Sadr. But the interesting thing I thought about that clip was that Representative Tulsi Gabbard, the Democrat, didn't seem to understand that threat. Oh, and I think she misspoke there when she said her bill was to arm the Kurds and the Shia. She meant it was to arm the Kurds and the Sunnis. You can check that out, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And arming the Sunnis and could destroy the stability of the Iraqi government is what she seemed to be admitting there. I also want to show a quick clip from Adam Kinzinger, the Republican who was on CNN's State of the Union with Tulsi Gabbard. And here he answers the question as to whether we're winning, and his answer is basically, or whether we're losing, and his answer is we're not winning, I think was the way it was phrased over here.
What do you make of that, Congressman? The president's assessment last week that we're not losing.
Well, of course, you're not losing and you're not winning because we're not really engaged in this fight. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to understand that the goal is the destruction of ISIS. The president, when we began this attack, I guess, on ISIS, he said, we're going to do it. We're going to bomb them. We're going to hit them, but we're not going to put troops on the ground. And in essence, what the president did was say, look, we need to destroy ISIS unless that takes boots on the ground, in which case the existence of boots on the ground is worse than the existence of ISIS. I think the president needs to stand in front of the American people and frankly lead on this and say, look, this is a cancer that's growing in the Middle East. This isn't just a situation where if the house catches on fire, it'll burn down and then we just look at a burned down house. This is now a house on fire in a densely packed neighborhood where this is going to spread to other places. So I think we have to be very aggressive at stopping this cancer now in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, where it's existing. And I think we have to show a big, major blow to ISIS, because right now you have a lot of people that are, sitting in their basements looking on the internet, that want to join ISIS, not because they want to be martyrs, but because they want to be part of something big. And until we show that the chance of martyrdom increases greatly by joining ISIS, I think we're going to continue to see this problem with foreign fighters.
It seems.
So yeah, that's another Republican who wants more boots on the ground, which is like the worst solution. American boots on the ground, not quite as, or just a little bit worse than the solution of Representative Tulsi Gabbard there, where we directly arm the Sunnis in defiance of what the Shia government wants. I think the best idea is if we can get the Shia government to bring the Sunnis in and arm the Sunnis instead of using the Shia militias, but who knows if that's going to happen. And then the reason all these choices are necessary is because the regular Iraqi army just doesn't work, and that's the last clip I want to show. The Secretary of Defense basically said the reason they lost Ramadi is because the regular Iraqi troops don't have the will to fight. And that's this clip over here.
Just last month, the U.S. and Iraq claimed to have the upper hand in the fight against ISIS. CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr caught up with Defense Secretary Ash Carter and asked him why ISIS was able to capture the key Iraqi city of Ramadi and gain momentum on a march towards Baghdad.
What apparently happened was that the Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force, and yet they failed to fight. They withdrew from the site, and that says to me, and I think to most of us, that we have an issue with the will of the Iraqis to fight ISIL and defend themselves. Now, we can give them training, we can give them equipment, we obviously can't give them the will to fight, but if we give them training, we give them equipment, and give them support, and give them some time, I hope they will develop the will to fight, because only if they fight can ISIL remain defeated.
A lot of people in Washington that you deal with on the other side of the aisle are saying, look, putting ground troops, putting controllers, airstrikes are not working. What do you foresee? What is your view on this?
Airstrikes are effective, but neither they nor really anything we do can substitute for the Iraqi forces' will to fight. They're the ones who have to beat ISIL and then keep them beaten. We can participate in the defeat of ISIL, but we can't make Iraq run as a decent place for people to live. We can't sustain the victory. Only the Iraqis can do that, and in particular, in this case, the Sunni tribes to the west. If there comes a time when we need to change the kinds of support we're giving to the Iraqi forces, we'll make that recommendation. But what happened at Ramadi was a failure of the Iraqi forces to fight. And so our efforts now are devoted to providing their ground forces with the equipment, the training, and to try to encourage their will to fight, so that our campaign enabling them can be successful both in defeating ISIL and keeping ISIL defeated in a sustained way. But these things we need to, all of our tactics and our procedures need to.
You are not at forward air controllers on the ground
We
yet.
have not made that recommendation.
So you can let me know what you think about the Secretary of Defense of the United States there admitting that the Iraqi troops did not have the will to fight, and that's why they lost Ramadi, and the various solutions, whether that means more American boots on the ground, whether it means letting Iraq use these Shia militias that are pledged to Iran, or directly arming the Sunnis like Tulsi Gabbard wants us to do, or getting a political solution like Secretary of Defense kind of mentioned that, and Adam Schiff mentioned having the central government in Iraq, the Shia government, bring the Sunni tribesmen in and arm them instead of using the Shia militias, or maybe we can get the Iraqi forces to come up with the will to fight. Secretary of Defense seemed to think so, but you can let me know what you think. I want to move on to one last topic before I end the show. Two quick clips on the death penalty. I've been against the death penalty for quite a long time, and I have seen it, the anti-death penalty movement, get a lot of victories, and I want to show a clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had ABC reporter Pierre Thomas talk about this news from Nebraska that they may get rid of the death penalty there because of objections from conservatives, and then sort of an overview of some of the anti-death penalty victories recently in this clip.
A big death penalty surprise. In the wake of so much news about crime and punishment in America, the Nebraska legislature has just voted to ban capital punishment, the first solidly red state to do so in 4 decades. Here's ABC's Pierre Thomas.
This week's vote in Nebraska capped off a dramatic debate.
For some crimes, death is the only appropriate punishment.
No individual has the right to take the life of another, nor should the state.
Now Nebraska could become the first conservative-leaning state to ban the death penalty, a move backed by many Republicans who say it's a moral issue.
My main objections come from my pro-life values.
But Republican Governor Pete Ricketts, a death penalty supporter, has promised to veto the measure. Still, the state legislature may have the votes to override him. It's just the latest in a series of significant challenges to capital punishment. Illinois enacted a decade-long moratorium after concerns about condemning potentially innocent men to death. The state abolished the death penalty in 2011. In Oklahoma, the botched execution of 38-year-old Clayton Lockett last year drew new scrutiny over the deadly multi-drug cocktails used for lethal injections.
A few minutes later, he began convulsing, lifting his head and his chest off of the gurney, even mumbling a few times.
The U.S. Supreme Court will soon decide if that drug cocktail is cruel and unusual punishment. Nationwide, 18 states and the District of Columbia ban capital punishment, and now a majority of Americans, 52% according to the latest ABC News Washington Post poll, would favor life in prison over the death penalty. But for some victims and their families, the most heinous crimes deserve the ultimate punishment. This month, a federal jury sentenced Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev to death.
I wanted justice for my family, and I felt that the ultimate justice was the death penalty.
Yet some in Boston had lobbied for life in prison. Capital punishment, a polarizing issue with passionate feelings on both sides. Exactly what they're seeing in Nebraska's difficult debate. For This Week, Pierre Thomas.
So yeah, I thought that was a pretty good report. A couple things about the Boston bombing I didn't like. Both, they didn't mention the fact that the jury in that case has to be death penalty qualified, which means you have to be in favor of the death penalty to be on a death penalty jury, even in Boston where most people are against the death penalty. And it also equated the families of the victims as people who are in favor of the death penalty, when a lot of times families of the victims don't want the death penalty. Later, they did have S.E. Cupp on make that point. Was one good point from S.E. Cupp. You don't see a lot of good points from her, but that was one. I'm not going to show that clip, but I do want to show another conservative. This is State Senator from Nebraska, Colby Koash, giving a conservative argument against the death penalty. First, cost, because the death penalty actually costs more than life in prison. Yes, you heard that right. Holding someone in prison for life is more costly, or holding someone in prison for life is less costly than executing them because of all the extra costs in the penalty phase and death row and a variety of other costs. And then also on moral pro-life grounds. Those are two good conservative arguments against the death penalty. You can see in this final clip of the show tonight here.
Koash joins me now. He voted in favor of abolishing the death penalty. Senator Koash, you are a conservative Republican. Why did you vote to get rid of the death penalty?
Well, for me, John, this was a practical thing. In Nebraska, we haven't actually executed anybody in 20 years, and it's been a cost to our state with lengthy appeals. And at the end of the day, we decided that a penalty that we can't impose is a penalty we shouldn't have on the books. And I've frequently said if there was any other program that was as costly and as inefficient as this has been, we as conservatives would have gotten rid of it a long time ago.
So it wasn't so much the moral component of the state taking somebody's life? This was a practical cost issue?
Well, certainly some of my colleagues have come to this from a moral standpoint. I'm pro-life. I campaign as a pro-life. And for some of us, in addition to the extreme cost and the inefficiency, supporting the death penalty just didn't seem to go with our pro-life values. And so that some of my colleagues came to it from that perspective as well.
And so that's nice to hear from conservatives. I'm always pleased to see conservatives have a consistent pro-life agenda that extends to the death penalty. It's not as hypocritical as people who are anti-abortion but pro-death penalty. And the cost, like I said, is also a good conservative argument. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm in kind of a rush. I do appreciate those of you who showed up for the live show. I think it was peaked at about 116, and I'm going to save all your live comments that disappear when this becomes a recorded show, and you can find them on my Patreon page. There's a link down to the Patreon page. If you want to donate to my Patreon page, you can put your cursor over the video right around here. There's a little eye you can click on, either for a direct donation or a monthly Patreon donation. I have, I think, 41 patrons right now that I really appreciate. I hope you appreciate all the clips I picked out for you from the shows this week. I hope they gave you a little bit more information about what the corporate media thought was important. Like I said, thanks for all of you who joined me live and kept me company. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, just let me know what you think of my clip selection or any of these news stories, and I'll be down in the comment section trying to respond to some comments this week, and I'll be doing the show next week a little bit delayed. I think it'll be starting at 7:30 p.m. instead of 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is Greenwich Mean Time minus 7 hours. I'll be seeing you then if you can join me live or as a recorded show. Until then, I'll be seeing you all around the internet.